We want to continue with Megillas Ruth a little bit, but I had mentioned the number of 120, that Boaz had 60 sons, 60 daughters. I was off by a factor of double, 30 sons, 30 daughters. So Boaz had a total of 60 children. Yeah.
Did his in-laws not pass away?
Huh?
Did his sons and daughters-in-law not pass away?
No, they all did pass away, yeah.
So wouldn't it be double then?
Yeah, so, no. So actually, I don't know. In other words, I don't know that. In other words, Chazal only say his children died. I don't remember if it said they all. Do you remember 100? I know the Chazal say the children died, so that would make 60 altogether. But either way, the idea was, as I had mentioned, a very difficult, strange medrash that says, since he had not invited Manoach to any of his 60 weddings, because he said, Manoach's not going to have kids, so he's never going to invite me to anything. So because of that, he was nanash, that he lost all of his children. And Manoach was blessed with Shimshon, who also eventually died in a tragic way, but Shimshon became a great Moshiach, a great savior for Klal Yisrael, and that was considered to be a great zchus. In fact, maybe some other time we'll talk about Shimshon a little bit. Shimshon is actually a fascinating figure. On one hand, if you read the biblical account, he's a strong guy and he did a lot of heroic stuff, but he seems to be sexually licentious and the like, and yet Chazal have a lot of deep meanings that all of these were kavanos l'shem shemayim. But again, that's not our subject now, but the point was that Boaz was nanash because of his insensitivity to Manoach, although I interpreted it to actually mean he was overly sensitive to Manoach. He didn't want to invite him to hurt his feelings, but nevertheless, it was not the proper thing to do. So, be it as it may, after losing his children, Boaz lost his wife. So exactly when Naomi shows up in town, back to Beis Lechem, with Ruth, her daughter-in-law, Boaz is coming back from the levaya of his wife. So Boaz is all alone, and all of his family is gone. And this is exactly when Ruth and Naomi come. So if you remember, Perek Beis was essentially describing the idea of what the Torah defines as the mitzvah of leket. Remember, there are three gifts in the field that you must leave for the poor. One is peah. Those are the corners of the field, remain standing, so the aniyim can take them. The second is leket. Leket are the sheaves of grain that, not the sheaves, the stalks of grain. The stalks of grain that fall over the other side of the sickle, that the harvester must let the poor people take. And then we have shichacha, which are forgotten sheaves. Now, the concept of following after the harvesters, which is a refrain that's used over and over again, that seems to be referring specifically to the mitzvah of leket, because you have the harvester cuts, things fall beyond the sickle, beyond the knife, the aniyim jump. Again, it's hard to imagine exactly, because you do get the impression from Megillas Ruth that there were like crowds of people following after the harvesters. So it kind of looks like a bit of a messy scene in which people are jumping. And then you'll recall that Boaz indicated that the harvesters should drop a little extra for Ruth to get, although it's hard to figure out how that's going to work if you have a whole bunch of people there. Okay, but be it as it may, I think the last question I left you with was Boaz's behavior. Once Boaz becomes aware that Ruth is the daughter-in-law of Naomi, who is his relative, specifically Naomi is his aunt. Let me just give you the yichus a little bit. Rashi spells it out in the beginning of Megillas Ruth. We have Nachshon ben Aminadav. He's a famous guy. Nachshon ben Aminadav was the head of the tribe of Yehuda, and according to at least some Chazals, he was the first one who jumped into the Red Sea before it split, and the water went up to his neck, or went up to his mouth, or went up to his nose, different opinions, because he had complete emunah in Hashem, and in his merit the Yam Suf split. Nachshon's sister, Elisheva, was Aaron HaKohen's wife, right? So Nachshon was also a brother-in-law of Aaron. Now, Nachshon had a number of sons, and three of the sons that are relevant to keep in mind are characters in the Megillas Esther. and that is Salmon is one son, Elimelech is another son, and Ploni Almoni. Again, we're going to see at the end of the Megillas Ruth, you may remember from Shavuos, that there was another redeemer who was poised to redeem Naomi's field, and his name is Tov. His name actually is Tov, and he is referred to as Ploni Almoni, which even in modern Hebrew means John Doe, and we'll discuss a little later why he was called Ploni Almoni. Okay, so it mentions Elimelech, Tov, and Ploni Almoni. I'm sorry, Elimelech, Tov, and Salmon are all the sons of Nachshon ben Aminadav. Boaz is the son of Salmon. The Megillah says that at the end. So it turns out that Boaz is Elimelech's nephew. Boaz is also Ploni Almoni's nephew, right? And therefore, the relationship of Boaz to Machlon and Chilion are first cousins. Okay, everyone gets the family relationship. Again, Rashi spells this out, that Salmon, that is Boaz's father. How do I know that? Because Megillas Ruth says that. Salmon, Tov, and Elimelech are all the sons of Nachshon ben Aminadav. Now, there is some serious chronological problems here because Nachshon ben Aminadav was obviously a person who left Mitzrayim, and here you're dealing with something that happened several hundred years later. So how long did people live, etc.? So the truth of the matter is there may be some wiggle room here because when we say someone is a son of Nachshon ben Aminadav, it might mean a great-grandson, etc. Although, again, it's a little difficult because if you look at the end of Megillas Ruth, it seems to give you an unbroken line of lineage. Right? It says all the way from Yehuda and Tamar, and Salmon, right? Nachshon gave birth to Salmon gave birth to Boaz, etc. But it's possible. Again, I don't want to, get hate mail on this. It is possible that even in an unbroken line of lineage, there are in fact breaks, meaning it might be giving you the prominent people in a chain. So when it says A gave birth to B, and B gave birth to C, and C gave birth to D, there may be, A prime, B prime, C prime, D prime, that are sometimes eliminated because they were not necessarily prominent. So that might be a simple way out of the chronological issue, or the alternative would be, as Chazal often assume, that certain tzaddikim had extraordinarily long lifespans and the like. So but there is, just be aware of the problem. Whatever your teretz is going to be aware of the problem of positioning Boaz as a grandson of Nachshon ben Aminadav would actually require a span of several hundreds of years. Okay. Was there a question? Yeah.
Does the Torah consider your uncle's wife a relative?
Say again?
Does the Torah consider your uncle's wife or your aunt's husband a relative?
Yes. Well, in terms of an erva, yeah, that's actually, yes, that is correct. The wife of your father's brother is an erva to you, although the wife of your mother's brother is not. So, but Naomi would be considered a relative of Tov. Okay, so just keep in mind the family relationships, and the most important one to remember here is that Boaz is a cousin of Machlon, and that's why Boaz marrying Ruth is not real Yibum. Real Yibum is when a brother marries the widow of his brother. When a cousin marries the widow of his cousin, that is not real Yibum, but we will see that there will be a spiritual concept. You might call it spiritual Yibum, even if it's not halachic Yibum. But the last question we dealt with we dealt with the issue of Boaz's behavior towards his aunt, towards his uncle's widow, in which once Boaz becomes aware that Ruth the Moabite is gathering to support Naomi, so the only thing he does is he does some kindness to Ruth. He says, drop a little extra for her. She's invited to kind of have lunch or take water with the workers, but he doesn't really support her. But ultimately, she still has to spend the whole day gathering grain as a worker. And the question is, why wasn't Boaz more openly kind and giving to his poor relative who has returned from the land of Moab after 10 years? So part of it is he didn't want to embarrass. Perhaps it was thought that a person is very humiliated to take tzedakah. Masha Einkein, if you're working after the harvesters, that's more like a working type of thing. Another was suggested, I think, that this was part of a test. The question whether Ruth's conversion was sincere, perhaps it required that she go through a certain hemshech of poverty. But be it as it may, Ruth was quite successful. It mentions, just to give you a sense, she gathered an ephah of barley, an ephah of barley. Now that is truly a huge, huge, huge amount. Let me just mention this to you, what it translates in modern shiurim. The amount of mun that fell every day in the midbar was 1/10 of an ephah. 1/10 of an ephah is also the amount of flour to be chayav in challah. Now, generally speaking, that would translate in terms of weight, although technically it's a volume measurement, but in terms of approximate weight, generally speaking, you're mafresh challah with a bracha only if it's 5 pounds of flour. So, if that's 1/10 of an ephah, so she brought back to Naomi 50 pounds of flour. Now, some say you're mafresh challah without a bracha from 2.5 pounds. So that would be half of that, be 25 pounds of flour. But even so, that's quite a lot for one day's work to bring back 25 pounds of flour or 50 pounds of flour. So she was quite successful. How much of it was actually the accidental gleaning and how much of it was the extra stuff that they dropped, that we don't really know. But she's very matzliach. By the way, the Gemara has an amazing comment, which is almost a shtickle lashon hara if it wouldn't be that Chazal made the observation. There's an expression in the Gemara that says, if somebody comes from an Aramean, someone comes from a bad origin, even though they converted, don't say anything negative about them for up to 10 generations. In other words, they're still going to be connected to their background. And it mentions that apparently Boaz operated a Haredi system of gender segregation, in which somehow there were women following the harvesters, there were men following the harvesters, and the men and the women did not mix. Meaning, although it must mean by definition that women were following men harvesters. I don't think there were female harvesters, but it was like women here, men here. They weren't mixing. And Boaz had said to Ruth a number of times, you should gather with the women. When they're harvesting, or when they're gleaning, you should follow the women. And when Ruth reports to Naomi, Ruth says, oh, he told me I should follow the men. So Chazal say that based on her Moabite orientation, that's still how she thought, that it was okay to follow the men. She didn't think there was a big deal, because she still had a tiny bit of Moabite culture inside of her. And it's pretty amazing how Naomi corrected her. Naomi corrects her, but without giving her musar. In other words, Ruth just says to Naomi, oh, it was so wonderful, he told me I should go glean glean with the men. And Naomi said, yes, it's a great thing that he told you to glean with the women. She didn't correct her. She just restated it, so Ruth would understand what the proper hanhaga was. Now, I do want to say that this drash of Chazal is really a drash. In Pshuto Shel Mikra, it's not really a stira. Because even though Ruth was gleaning with the women, she was following the male harvesters. So when Ruth said, I was following the men, she was referring to following the harvesters who were men. In other words, alibi diemes in pshuto shal mikra, it's lav dafka a stira, but Chazal do have a drasha here that Rus almost unavoidably was still connected to some of the immorality, just in terms of speech, that a Moabite would have. Okay. And when Naomi discovers, I'm just going in order of the Megillah, when Naomi discovers that Hashem brought Ruth into the field of Boaz, she saw this as a message from God that we need to be involved with Boaz, that there's a reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought Ruth, because Ruth did not go to Boaz's field because she knew he was a relative. She just picked a field to go into. And Naomi realizes this is Bashert. This is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Naomi hatches a plan, right? So now we're up to Perek Gimel, right? This is only 4 chapters. We're up to Perek Gimel. And Naomi says a very daring thing, hard to understand. Essentially, she is proposing that Boaz marry Ruth. And the reason why Boaz should marry Ruth is to perpetuate the memory of Machlein. And this is really the basis of Yibum. Again, let's go back to Yibum in the Torah. The Torah says, if a man dies without a child, a boy or a girl, there is a mitzvah on his brother to marry the widow in order to perpetuate the brother's neshama by having a child. Right? The child, as it were, would contain the neshama of the brother. And in that way, a person has a legacy after him that continues to live. Okay, this is the mitzvah of Yibum. The Torah then says, as you know, if the brother does not want to do it, there's a ceremony called Chalitzah, where she takes off his shoe and she spits in front of him, not in his face. Bifanav means in front of him. And she says, so shall be done to the man who does not want to rebuild his brother's home. And that ceremony is called Chalitzah. Chalitzah means removal of the shoe. And she is not allowed to marry anyone else until she gets Chalitzah. Chalitzah is like a get. A Yavama cannot marry until she has Chalitzah. Now, it's very clear from the Torah, is it not, that Yibum is the preferred thing to do. If you don't want Yibum, first of all, then you do Chalitzah. Now, the ceremony of Chalitzah is a little strange for a few ways. I mean, I get how it works when it's he who doesn't want to do Yibum. Right? So shall be done to the man who does not want to rebuild his brother's home. Okay. But what if he wants and she doesn't want? Now the halacha still is we don't do Yibum if she doesn't want. But if she doesn't want, why does she spit at him and says, so shall be done to the man? She's the one that doesn't want. I don't know. It's a good kasha, I think. But l'maisa, the halacha doesn't change, meaning the halacha is the same, whether it's he who doesn't want or she who doesn't want. There's a ritual of chalitza, and she spits, and she must declare these words in Lashon HaKodesh, so shall be done achiv. Now, what about today? What do we do today? What do we do today? Right? Still a situation. A man dies without a child, right? So what happens? So there's a machlokes, the Beis Yosef and the Ramah. It goes back to Rishonim, really. Actually, it goes back to the Gemara, ultimately. That is, according to the Beis Yosef, and Sfardim, in theory, follow this, there's still a mitzvah of Yibum. There's a mitzvah of Yibum. If the guy doesn't want or she doesn't want. In fact, by Sfardim, since there's no Chen Rabbeinu Gershom, even if the Yavam is married, he could do Yibum. Because it's only polygamy, which is allowed. So Sfardim, in theory, L'maisa they don't, I'll get back to that in a second. In theory, Sfardim are mutter to do Yibum. even today, and that would be the preferred mitzvah. The Ramah brings that the minhag of Ashkenazim is not to do Yibum at all. We do not do Yibum at all. Meaning even if the Yavam is single, and the Yavam wants to marry her, and she wants to marry the Yavam, our minhag is we do not do Yibum, and we only do Chalitzah. We go straight to Chalitzah. Of course, once again, you have the kasha, so why should he be disgraced? But still, that's the halacha. And the reason is based on an idea that was said by the Tana Abba Shaul, who says like this: in reality, marrying your brother's widow is actually an erva. For example, let's assume the brother's widow had a child, and you'd want to marry her. It's actually an erva. It is a forbidden erva. Eishes ach sheyesh lo banim is a chi of kares. So Abba Shaul Tainas, in reality, every single case of Yibum is Gilui Arayas. But the Torah gave you a mitzvah that overrides the Gilui Arayas. So says Abba Shaul, this is only going to be mutter when your kavana is 100% for the mitzvah. If your kavana is not 100% for the mitzvah, you're transgressing the erva of Eishesach. That's what Abba Shaul says. Therefore, the Ramah says, since Bisman Hazeh, I guess Sfardim are more capable of kavana, Ashkenazim are said not to be capable of kavana 100% l'shem mitzvah, so we don't allow Yibum because we're choshesh, it's ki'ilu pogeya be'erva. This is based on Abba Shaul. So among Ashkenazim, we go straight to Chalitzah. We don't do Yibum at all. Now, I understand in 1948, when the state of Israel was established, so they had two chief rabbis, right? So they had Ashkenazi. Rav Herzog was the first Ashkenazic chief rabbi. And then you had Rav Meir ben Zion Chai Uziel. Rav Uziel was the first Sephardic chief rabbi. Remember, Rav Kook died before there was a state of Israel. So Rav Kook was not the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel. He was under the British mandate. So Rav Uziel and Rav Herzog entered into a joint agreement where, in order to promote unity of the congregation, they made certain takanos. One takana was Sephardim accepted the ban of Rabbeinu Gershom not to practice polygamy, except for pre-existing marriages that were grandfathered in. So some Yemenites had multiple wives, but polygamy would no longer be allowed to be practiced by Sephardim. And the other takana was Sephardim would not do Yibum to create uniformity between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. Rav Ovadia, who later became a Sephardic chief rabbi in the 1970s, actually took the position that Rav Uziel did not have the right, as Rav Harashi, to kind of get rid of Sephardic minhagim. And he said, and then he raised the question, as Rav Ovadia said, how come whenever there's an agreement between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, it's always Sephardim giving something up? Like, what did Ashkenazim change in this choseh? They didn't change anything. Sephardim agreed to give up their unique minhagim. So, although Rav Ovadia was not calling for polygamy, he didn't want that to come back, although I'm not sure why not. He did say that there was nothing wrong with Sephardim doing Yibum even today. So, I'm just not sure what the practice is. Back from 48 until the 70s, there was a takana of the Rabbanut that Sephardim would not do Yibum. Rav Ovadia mattered Yibum, but I'm not sure if halacha l'maisa anything happened. See, polygamy he couldn't get away with it. Polygamy is against the laws of the state of Israel. So if somebody were to try polygamy, they could get arrested for bigamy. Yibum is not against any secular law, so it's only a matter of halacha, one way or the other. So I don't know if Sephardim do practice Yibum or do not practice Yibum, but according to the Shulchan Aruch, Sephardim could practice Yibum even bisman hazeh. Yeah.
So I wanted to go back on the opinion of Abba Shaul. Is that my understanding of that sugya is that it's a machloket between Abba Shaul and Rabbanan, and the Rambam goes like Rabbanan, and Rabbeinu Tam and some others go like Abba Shul, which is
right. No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So that's why you have a machloket. The Balei Tosfos are Machmer, the Rambam is Mekel. It's among the Amram in the Gemara itself. Now, keep in mind that obviously Abba Shaul himself does not mean this totally literally. In other words, if you were to mamash say that if I'm baya liyavama shalo l'shem mitzvah, it's erva, that would mean the child would be a mamzer, and certainly nobody would say the child of Yibum is going to be a mamzer. It's more of a spiritual thing, but spiritually, it's considered to be considered like an erva. So we do chalitza even today. It's very important. I think I may have mentioned to you, forgive me if I'm repeating it, that you don't get to see chalitzas that often. There's a special chalitza shoe that's like a Viking boot. So I remember when I was in Baltimore many years ago, so we had heard there was going to be a chalitza in town. And I had never seen a chalitza. Most of the yeshiva community had not seen a chalitza. So we all came, to the shul to see the chalitza, like 500 people were in the shul. So this was a very strange story because the man who died and his wife, who's the Yavama, they were not religious. So there was no thought about chalitza, he didn't care. But the brother was a Baal Tshuva in Eretz Yisrael. And the brother insisted that there be chalitza, and he said he'll come from Israel to Baltimore to give this woman chalitza. So she thought it was crazy. She didn't know what it was really. But she said if it's going to humor him, okay, she'll do it. So she walks in. She was told it'll be a 15-minute ceremony in a rabbi's office. So I still remember this, and I feel bad about it to this day. So she walks in to the basement of the shul just to get this over with, because it meant nothing to her. And all of a sudden, there are 500 people staring at her. And she kind of psyched out. She wanted, she wanted to leave. I mean, she was a widow. I mean, she wanted to leave. So the rabbis took her in the office to calm her down and, gave her a cup of tea, whatever it would be. But the whole chalitza was only done because the Yavam wanted to do chalitza. The woman herself didn't care. But it was interesting. The truth is, 500 people. So I certainly didn't see anything at all. So if I want to see a chalitza, I can go to YouTube and you can see a chalitza if you want. But I did not get to see it. But still, we do chalitza. It's an important thing. There's a ma'aser with Rav Chaim Meiser. Again, forgive me for free associating, but this is such a cute ma'aser. Rav Chaim Meiser of Grodzinski, who died in 1941, was the Gadol Hador, together with the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim died earlier. And Rav Chaim Meiser was brilliant, a genius, but also a person who was such a Baal Chesed and a Baal Tzedakah and a Baal Hatava. Millions and millions of dollars passed through his hands for all sorts of tzedakahs and chesed, and he was the one who orchestrated all of the movement of the yeshivas to Shanghai to get them out of Europe. He was the one who coordinated everything. So his health was always frail. So for every summer, he went for a month to a forest area. It's kind of a vacation resort where a lot of Druzgenik, where a lot of religious people went because of the air, because of the climate, etc. So one time the doctor, so he would only go for a month, and he would always be back in Vilna by Elul, Rosh Chodesh Elul, the time of Tshuva. So one month the doctor told him that he's not well, he needs to stay in that type of environment through the Yomim Tovim. So he was a little surprised, because although there was a shul and there was a minyan, but they were not really that religious. I mean, it wasn't conservative or reform, but whatever it was. Now, he didn't have somebody chachamim, he didn't have people that he could speak in learning with, etc. So he's kind of condemned to be in this like hick-town village with very, very few religious Jews there. And he's sad and he's thinking to himself, like, why am I here? Like, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of make me be stuck here for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur, for Sukkot? So all of a sudden he sees a Jew who's a Litvish Jew, kind of wearing a long coat that looks like a frum, a beard. So he's very, very happy. He goes over to him and says, Reb Yid, Shalom Aleichem, what brings you here? It's the off season. Remember, people would come in the summer, but it's already not summer, it's already fall, it's already yellow. So even the visitors who came, there weren't that many visitors. And the permanent group, or like the Catskills used to be, there was really off season, very, very few religious Jews. So the person says, I tell you, I have a brother who was a forest ranger here, a forest ranger, and he died, and he left a widow with 3 children. And how is she going to raise 3 children by herself? And I lost my wife recently. So I thought I would come here and I would marry her. And I would help raise my nephews. So Rav Chaim Ozer turns white. He says, Reb Yit, this is an Isser D'Oraisa. You're marrying your brother's widow that has children. Remember, if your brother's widow has children, it's an Isser D'Oraisa mamish. You can't do this. So the man says, I'm not going to have just any person with a beard tell me, he didn't know Rav Chaim, tell me what to do. He says, I have 3 nephews who need a father, and who's going to take care of them? And I am able to take care of them. I'm doing a chesed, I'm doing a good thing. What are you telling me? I can't do it. So Rav Chaim Ozer says, this is not a chumrah of the Chayei Adam. This is not a chumrah of the Magen Avram. This is a pasuk in the Chumash. It's a pasuk in the Chumash. You're not allowed to marry Eishes Ach. In fact, that was Henry VIII got in trouble with that pasuk. That's why he started the Church of England. In fact, that's why he ordered a shas, because he had heard of it. There was such a thing called Yibum. Henry VIII commissioned, he bought a big shas from Daniel Bomberg because he wanted someone to learn Yavamas to kind of give him a heter for whatever he wanted to do. That's true. So Henry VIII, I don't know if he learned Yavamas, but whatever, but he was into Yavamas for that particular reason. So Rav Chaim Ozer is talking to the person and says, what can I do to convince you? Who could convince you? He says, I have to hear it from the biggest rabbi. I can't hear it just from any Tom, Dick, and Harry who has a beard. I have to hear from a big rabbi. He says, who's a big rabbi? He says, it has to be Rav Grozensky of Vilna. Nobody else. Again, he didn't know who he was talking to. So Rav Chaim Ozer said, that's who I am. I guess he showed him identification. I don't know. So the person was convinced. Rav Chaim Ozer said, now I understand why Hashem kind of abandoned me here, because I needed to meet this person and get him away from doing a very serious Aveira. Now, the Ramban says in Parshas Vayishlach, if you remember, Parshas Vayeshev rather, we have the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Now remember, of course this is before Matan Torah. Remember the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Yehuda had a son, Er. Tamar was the daughter-in-law. Er died because he did evil in the eyes of God, and Onan died because he did evil in the eyes of God. Yehuda had a third, which, whatever it is, Motzi Zera Levatala. Yehuda had a third son, Shelah. He did not want Tamar to marry Shelah because he thought she causes the husbands to die prematurely for whatever reason. So the story was that Tamar dressed up like a prostitute, cohabited with Yehuda, and eventually had twins, Peretz and Zerach. Boaz, therefore David, comes from Peretz. Unbroken line, the end of Megillas Ruth. Now the Ramban is masber like this. The Ramban is masber that although the mandatory chiyuv of Yibum is only a brother to a brother, but in reality, the spiritual idea that Yibum continues a soul can be by any relative who marries, and that is why Tamar tricked Yehuda into cohabiting, because that would perpetuate the souls of Er and Onan. Now, this of course is pre-Matan Torah Yibum. So you might say there's nothing, once the Torah is given, this concept no longer applies, but the Ramban says no. The same concept that predated the Torah continues to be operative after Matan Torah, and the Ramban says, and that is the inyan of Boaz and Ruth. Okay, so the Ramban connects what Naomi wants to do with Boaz and Ruth with Yehuda and Tamar. Of course, that's the ancestor, right? Yehuda and Tamar is Boaz's ancestor. So Naomi has this idea that there are no brothers. The only brother Machlon has is Chilion. Chilion died. right, a long time ago. So Boaz is the one that will perpetuate the neshama of Machlaim, who had no children. Right? It's Yibum. Okay, so we can get Naomi's idea, right? Naomi's idea is exactly the Yehuda and Tamar idea. But one of the questions, once again, is she doesn't go to Boaz and propose it. Right? Boaz is a widower. He lost his wife. He lost his kids. Right? She doesn't go to Boaz and propose it. And she has Ruth do something that, again, if it wouldn't be in the book of Ruth, it would be not sneas to even talk about. She says, go to Boaz in the middle of the night. Boaz will be sleeping in the barn, in the threshing floor. Now, why is Boaz sleeping in the threshing floor? So Rashi says a reason. He says, this was such a corrupt, dishonest generation that he had to sleep with the grain because people would steal it. It's like those people who sleep in their riots, they sleep in the store with a machine gun or whatever it would be. So Boaz was sleeping with the grain. So you sneak in while he's sleeping, you lie down at his feet, and when he wakes up, which he will wake up, you tell him what it is. And says you go to the mikveh first, etc., you're tohar. So one question, again, we'll talk about this tomorrow, one question that one has to think about is, okay, we get what Naomi's idea is, but why is she implementing it in a way that is not entirely kosher? In which a woman comes and there's yichud and she lies by his feet. And you see that Boaz is even afraid of his reputation. He says she has to leave before the dawn. So nobody should think, oh, a woman spent the night in the threshing floor. Right? All of this, right? So that's a question to think about. I do want to point out one little thing, though, that's very, very nice. It mentions that she uncovers his feet. She lies at his feet. And by the way, people make a mistake. This was not, they did not have relations. I mean, I hope you understand that. I mean, some people, for some reason, think they had intercourse. They absolutely did not. Actually, the truth is, other than the yichud issue, which may not have been usher at that time, this was actually a very modest type of scene. But she does uncover his feet, because that is a subtle reminder of Chalitzah, meaning to say, if you don't want to perpetuate the soul of Machlam, your feet will be uncovered, just like the Chalitzah, which is the removal of the shoe. So it's kind of a remez to Boaz, that he has a chiyuv, he has an achrayus, he has a chesed obligation towards his cousin. And Boaz agrees. Boaz understands. Boaz was shocked. Boaz maybe didn't think about it because, after all, there's a lot in Boaz's mind. He lost 60 children. He lost his wife. He himself is very old. It could very well be that his cheshbon was, I'm not going to have another child. And yet, this type of scene, the very shocking nature of this scene, made him realize that there is an obligation here. And Boaz says he will take care of it, but he has to negotiate with Tov, who is Boaz's uncle, Ploni Almoni. Again, we'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay.